They thought a single shove and a shaky whistle had finally tamed women's basketball's biggest storm. For the first 8 minutes in Atlanta, the Dream's bench bounced like a pepperly. An early turnover on a limping Caitlin Clark quad. Still wrapped from a 2-week strain sent coaches high-fiving and fans howling. They believed the Phenom was hobbled, the rest were blind, and the night already belonged to them. But while Atlanta celebrated, Clark was running his silent systems check. Yes, the leg burned and the feverish chills still hadn't broken. Yet the only number that mattered to her was the scoreboard. Meanwhile, the officials kept swallowing their whistles as Ryan Howard tugged jerseys. And bumped hips just the latest chapter in a league-wide debate over how much punishment one star should have to absorb. Head coach Stephanie White saw it. 2. If the game was going to be a street fight, she'd send in her enforcer. With one wave of her hand, Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull rose from the bench and the entire script flipped. The Dream hadn't ended Clark's night, they'd just let her fuse. The Indiana Fever opened the night looking exactly like a team missing its spark. Coach Stephanie White rolled out a stopgap lineup that left Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull her pace setters glued to the bench. The result was molasses, 1 pass possessions, slow rotations, and only 13 points in the first quarter while Atlanta raced ahead on fresh legs. Caitlin Clark, quad-taped and running a low-grade Fever, still willed herself into the box score with the Fever's first bucket. Yet every cut she made drew a grab from Ryan Howard and 0 whistles from the officials. Fans in red and navy roared. They thought body blows and a cold rim had solved the Clark problem. But that early Dream surge masked a hidden flaw, with that hole currently drilling a league-leading 56% from deep. And Cunningham's non-stop motor, Indiana's offense, flattened, their pace plummeting from its season average of 83 possessions per game to a crawl. Atlanta bought the illusion that they were in control. White read the warning lights. 8 minutes in, she yanked the starters and tapped her bench shooters. The arena barely noticed the substitution, but on the Fever's sideline a current of urgency snapped through the huddle. Clark rested her hands on her knees, nodded once, and whispered, "Run with me." That was the moment Atlanta's carefully crafted plan started ticking like a bomb, only they didn't hear the countdown. Next up, the Dream learned what happens when you leave the snipers wide open on the wings. The Dream's legal cheap showed Atlana's plan was simple: turn every cut into a wrestling match, and pray the whistle stayed silent. From the moment Ryan Howard wrapped an arm around Caitlin Clark's waist on the very first drive, the officials blinked tan. That split second of leniency became an open invitation. Jersey tugs, hip checks, even a shove that skidded Clark across the scorer's table slid right past 3 sets of eyes. Each no-call poured lighter fluid on the crowd. Cameras caught Howard jawing, "You can't guard me," as she jogged back on defense, while Clark, still fighting chills and a tape quad, just tightened her ponytail and got back in line. ATHLONsports.com, FoxSportsRadio.IHEART.com. On the Fever bench, Sophie Cunningham stood, arms folded, tracking every grab like a bouncer watching a bar fight. The league's newest self-appointed enforcer had spent the past week telling reporters she'd step in when the refs won't. Social feeds detonated. #ProtectCaitlin trended inside a half hour. Even Clark's boyfriend fired off a post tagging the WNBA for letting a superstar get mugged on national TV. Sports.yahoo.com, but inside State Farm Arena, the only voices that mattered held whistles and they kept them holstered. Indiana's offense froze. Possession after possession stalled as Clark fought through forearms and phantom screens. The shot clock became their enemy, and Atlanta ballooned the lead to double digits. Coach Stephanie White pleaded once, then twice, before turning away from the officials entirely. She grabbed her board, circled to names Cunningham and Lexi Hull and signaled for the pair to report. As they peeled off warm-ups, Clark caught Cunningham's eye. No words, just a nod that said everything. Time to make them hear us. The Dream thought bruises and silence had solved the Clark equation. They were wrong on both counts because the moment those snipers stepped across the scorer's line, Atlanta's math stopped making sense. Change the question. Stephanie White's marker squeaked twice across her clipboard then. The lid snapped shut. Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham peeled off their warm-ups with that unmistakable about-time swagger. The clock read for minutes, 21 seconds, but momentum flipped in a heartbeat. First trip down. Clark whipped a one-hand sling pass to Hull hiding in the weak side corner. Splash. Hull entered the night drilling an absurd 48+% from deep, and Atlanta somehow left her blanketed in air. The Dream scrambled to possessions later. Clark repeated the sequence, same corner, same shooter, same result. State Farm Arena went from roaring to restless in under 30 seconds. White's lineup tweak had injected raw oxygen. Indiana's pace rocketed back to its season norm. Mid-80s possessions per 48. Ball zipping through 5 sets of hands before Atlanta could even shout switch. Cunningham matched Hull's shooting with grit. She sprinted the length of the floor to snuff a Howard fast break layup, popped up laughing, then immediately buried a trail 3 of her own. The scoreboard shrank. The Dream's early double-digit cushion deflated to 5, then 3, then 2. Cameras caught Clark grinning through her mouth guard. She hadn't taken a shot in nearly 3 minutes. And yet the entire game now bent around her gravity. Atlanta had prepped for a one-woman problem. White had just introduced a four-headed riddle, Clark orchestrating hole sniping, Cunningham crashing lanes, Kelsey Mitchell tearing up the secondary defender. The Dreams bench exchanged worried looks. Their stop Caitlin blueprint no longer applied because Indiana simply changed the question they were asking. And that, as we were about to see, is when Ryan Howard decided talk was louder than tape. Rise of the end for Sarah Hine Howard had just muscled in an N1, pounding her chest and barking, "You can't guard me," toward the Fever bench. The sellout crowd roared its approval. Atlanta's swagger was back, and the scoreboard still. Lean Dream. Sophie Cunningham took the taunt personally. 2 trips later, she sprinted the length of the floor, erased a Howard layup at the glass, then popped up laughing as if to say, "That's one." On the ensuing possession, she buried a trail 3 and, jogging back, muttered the line that would flood social media within minutes: "If the refs won't, I will." From that moment, Atlanta's math unraveled. Cunningham's energy lit a fuse. Indiana rattled off, attended a burst cap by Lexi Hull's third corner bomb, turning what had been a 12-point hole into a one-possession game. During the run, Clark didn't attempt a single shot. She simply orchestrated, racking up 3 dimes in 90 seconds while Natasha Howard cleaned up inside. SBNation.com, ESPN.com, the noise flipped, too. Every Cunningham bump drew a swell of cheers. Every Howard shook a chorus of boos. What started as the Dreams' night had become their nightmare because Indiana now had an enforcer, and she'd made it clear the physical toll would be paid. Back in full. Next, Clark trades silence for symphony, and Atlanta finds out what happens when the maestro decides to play every instrument herself. Silent revenge. Clark the maestro. Caitlin Clark's jumper was ice cold 0-4-5 from deep. A 140-game streak snapped, but instead of forcing the issue, she flipped the game on its head. Every time Atlanta loaded the bodies at her hip, she fired a skip pass that was halfway to the corner before the defense blinked. TLKSPORT.com. By halftime, she piled up 6 assists, each one a clean look for someone else in blue. The box score would finish with those same 6 dimes, next to just a turnover's quiet numbers on paper, but the engine of a 20-7 run that erased Atlanta's cushion. ESPN.com. Her favorite target, Lexi Hull, who's drilling a league best 56% from 3 this season. Leave Hull alone for a heartbeat, and Clark's laser finds her hands. Chase Hull over a screen, and the pocket pass hits Natasha Howard diving to the rim instead. StatMuse.com. Clark never even celebrated the passes, she just backpedaled. Hand raised in the universal sign for again. Atlanta finally realized they hadn't shut her down. They turned her into a conductor with every string section tuned and ready. Next, Ryan Howard tries to match that symphony with solo guitar feedback, and the meltdown is spectacular. Howard's meltdown. Ryan Howard's swagger peaked at the 7-minute mark of the third. She splashed a step-back 3, pointed at the Fever bench, and barked, "You can't guard me." The crowd drank it, and Atlanta still clung to a 5-point edge and believed Clark's cold hand meant lights out. Then the scoreboard flipped like a switch. Clark answered the taunt with a coast-to-coast layup, then zipped a no-look dime to Damiris Danis for a corner bomb. Lexi Hull stole the inbound. Sophie Cunningham cashed the trail 3. In 1 minute 46 seconds, the Dreams' lead was smoke. ESPN's win probability chart nosedived from 64% Atlanta to 55% Indiana. Before the next time Althor tried to talk the game back under control, giant refs, after a bump call, flashing the too small gesture at Hull, but the whistles stayed silent, and the meme machines fired up. Clips of Clark coolly replying, "I'm not scared of you," exploded across X and TikTok, while fan edits overlaid Howard's trash talk with the rapidly shrinking score bug. By quarters, and the Dream were down 3. Howard was visibly fuming, and Cunningham's "If the refs won't, I will" line had spawned the night's no. One trending tag. The physical clamps Atlanta had slapped on Clark were now handcuffs on themselves. Every extra shove drew louder boos. Every Fever runout felt inevitable. Fourth quarter next. White staggers Clark's minutes like a boxer's jab, and the Fever proved that closing time can feel like punishment. Closing time. Stephanie White treated Caitlin Clark like a closer's pitch count. Early in the fourth, she yanked her star for a 60-second breather. Let Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull whip the tempo, then reinserted Clark the way a boxer flicks a jab, just enough to rattle the Dream's rhythm before pulling her out again. Each appearance triggered a surge. First run, Lexi knifed backdoor for a layup, then drilled the corner triple, slicing Atlanta's cushion of 4. Second run, Clark returned, lobbed a no-look to Damiris Danis for another 3, and suddenly, the Fever were down just a single possession. Atlanta's crowd felt the seesaw. Ryan Howard missed short. Cunningham swallowed the rebound, and for 18 glorious seconds, the ball pinged through Navy jerseys until Clark found Hull. Again splash. Tie game. White let Clark sit one last time. buying her lungs while Natasha Howard bruised in the paint. Then, with 2:07 left and the score knotted at 74, the maestro took her final bow. The closing script wrote itself. Clark sucked to defenders, slipped the rock to Kelsey Mitchell, and Mitchell splashed a step-back three that yanked the lead away. For good. Fever.WNBA.com Atlanta pressed. Clark coolly fed Aaliyah Boston for a dagger lay-in. 7 seconds later, Cunningham slid under Ryan Howard, drew the offensive foul, and popped up pumping both fists. Free throws from Cunningham, and Mitchell iced the 81-76 win, sending 17,000 stunned fans to the exits. White's gamble staggering Clark in 1-minute bursts meant her superstar finished on fresh legs, orchestrating an 11 to the finishing kick despite a 0-4-7 night from deep. Clark's final line, 13 points, 10 assists. Zero doubt whose fingerprints were on every decisive play. Atlanta had schemed for a single threat. Indiana closed with 4. The Dream didn't just lose a lead, they lost the question they'd spent all night trying to answer. Next and last, the fallout. Why a shaky whistle is suddenly the WNBA's hottest headline, and how Cunningham's the refs won't. I will flip an entire conversation. Fallout and future shock when the horn sounded. Atlanta's loss was only half the story. Within minutes, highlights of Howard's shove and Cunningham's the refs won't. I will rebuttal rocketed across every sports feed. League HQ promised a comprehensive review of post-stream contact, but fans were already pointing to a deeper problem. How many hits must a generational talent absorb before the whistle finally blows? Comment threads turned into town halls, and hashtag protect the stars trended about the game itself. Cunningham, meanwhile, woke up to 1 million new followers and a backorder on Fever number 9 jerseys. Her pivot from Stretchford to resident bodyguard struck a chord, especially with younger viewers who feel the W's physicality has crossed a line. She reposted one clip with a single caption: "Play hard, play fair, no lecture, just a reminder that toughness and cheap shots are the same thing for Indiana." The win did more than bump their record to .500. It proved the Clark-centric offense can morph on demand. Hole sniping, Mitchell's isolation burst, Cunningham's edge, Boston's post-gravity. For legitimate closers in one locker room, man, they just survived a night. When their ace couldn't buy a 3, voters took notice. Early all-star tallies now list all for inside the fan vote top 30. A feat the franchise hasn't sniffed since Tamika Catchings wore the jersey. The rematch comes fast. Less than 24 hours after the street fight, Indiana walks into Brooklyn to face the defending champs. Clark's quad is still tender, the whistle's still a mystery, and the Fever are still chasing more respect than wins. But here's what everyone in the league now understands: if this is what Indiana looks like on a bad shooting night, the ceiling isn't a playoff spot, it's a parade route. They tried to bully the rookie, muzzle the maestro, and flip the script. Instead, they handed her a pen, and Caitlin Clark just started writing the chapter nobody else wants to read.